Hello and welcome to another episode of Spiritually Incorrect. On this episode we have The White Gospel, Is Trump a Christian? And the Humanity of Illegal Immigrants. I'm your host Seth Hart. Joined with me is Jonathan Lionheart.
Well, howdy there.
Howdy, John. Are you trying to be a Southerner there?
I'm trying to be an American. This is election season. I'm a Canadian, and I'm trying to fit in with y'all good people.
What is it when we think about Americans, we think of like Texas? And in Texas, the number one thing they want to do is like leave the U.S.
I know. I can't. There's nothing fun to imitate about someone from Seattle. They're just,
I know
hey.
they're boring. I've been to Seattle.
Me too.
They don't have culture out there. It's not no American culture.
Oh, the Pacific Northwest, Seth, is the best part of your whole country. That's where I'm from, up there in Canada, Vancouver, Canada.
Boo, I'm glad we kept it in another country. There were times that the United States entertained invading Canada. They even had a plan about how to invade Canada and take it over. Never implemented it, of course.
Canadians have a whole song about the one time we got back at America in a war, where we laugh about burning down the White House in the War of 1812.
Wait. What? It was 1812, right? When you burned down the White House. What year did Canada become a country?
I don't even know, man. We don't learn about.
You didn't burn down it. England did. Don't take away what England did.
We existed. Don't do this. No,
there was no Canada.
Do not take. Okay, I will sing the song. There was a Canada.
There was no Canada.
Do you know how the song goes? It's really.
Yeah, you showed it to me.
Yeah,
What's the title for our audience?
The War of 1812. And the White House burned, and we're the ones that did it. It burned, and the Americans ran and cried. It burned, and things were very historical. And the Americans ran and cried like a bunch of little babies, wah, in the War of 1812. That's literally the song. It's literally the song.
And we're about to talk about how alienating and dehumanizing and violent Trumpism can make people. Being Canadian apparently makes it even worse. You like burning down other people's Capitol buildings and calling the people crybabies.
I readily concede that Canadians love to hate Americans, and part of it's because America, you're over here. I'll admit there's a little bit of a sense of we're hearing constantly about your politics, and we're up there in the north, like wishing we could play a part in it, and the only way we can feel like we are is by taking cheap shots at you. But at the same time, you got to admit, America makes it easy to make fun of her. You guys are not a hard place to make fun of.
Well, I will say this. When I was there, I thought it was very unusual that Canadians paid more attention to U.S. elections than they did their own. That was very strange. And I would ask people, it's like, why do you care so much about American elections? And the answer I always got was, well, it impacts us. So I asked how. And no one ever had a good answer. That was always the going answer. And that's when I realized at that point, American politics is entertainment. And nobody realizes it. We're
just
doing
the Hunger
this
Games.
It is.
It's the entertainer guy. What's his name? Stanley Tucci from Hunger Games. All right, there we go. That's the election.
We watch elections and we vote for our team. It's like watching a sports team. That's my team, and you vote for your team, it's like when you get to participate in, it's like a game you get to be a part of. And that's and that's why Donald Trump is the perfect politician.
Because he's the perfect entertainer. So.
Yeah, that's my theory, and I'm sticking with it, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
So who do we have to actually give us some real ideas, John? Not my wacko conspiracy theories.
Well, today we have on Jim Wallis, who is the founder and editor of the Sojourners magazine. Wallis joined Georgetown University as the inaugural Archbishop Desmond Tutu Chair in Faith and Justice. He also worked as a spiritual advisor to President Barack Obama.
Never heard of him.
Yeah, no, it's he's small potatoes. And Jim also is the author of dozens of books, including God's Politics and his most recent book, The False White Gospel, Rejecting Christian Nationalism, Reclaiming the Faith, and Refounding Democracy, which is very much in line with the election, what's at stake in the election, and this question of, can Christians vote for Trump? Which is the question at the heart of today's episode, which was supposed to be a two-parter. Right, Seth?
It probably will be, just not before, November.
Yeah,
that big day in November.
Our goal for this was to ask, can Christians vote for Trump, and to have one person say yes and the other person say no. And Jim Wallis was our big emphatic no. And then we've reached out to a number of other Christian people who are pro-Trump, including Eric Metaxas and Wayne Grudem. And we've been emailing back and forth with Wayne Grudem to try to schedule a time. I'm not sure it's going to happen, though, before the election. So part 2 may not come in time as we'd hoped. So we apologize for that. We'd hoped for a bit more of a both sides type of thing, but we'll see.
I'll do all this in an opening thing, so don't worry about that.
No, I feel like what I just said was sufficient. Why do you need to spit in my face instead of being the wind beneath my wings, Seth?
Because you're a dirty Democrat.
No, I'm not. I'm Canadian. I don't take a side. You guys have a binary 2 system. Canada doesn't.
You literally call your guys conservatives and liberals, and then you got some other weird parties out there as well. But give me a break. The conservatives and the liberals. Don't act like you don't have like surrogate parties.
I reserve the right to judge America for things that we also do, but yeah. That's my right as a Canadian. America gets to just talk about itself and ignore the rest of the world. We get to make fun of America without ever turning that criticism back on ourselves. That's how the system works, Seth.
I'm glad you have such healthy national pastimes.
Well, thank you so much for being here with us today. Your recent book is titled The False White Gospel. Can you give our audience a sense of what you mean by this? How is this gospel you're talking about white, and how is it false?
Well, I'm going around the country trying to talk about the faith factor in this election, which I think could be decisive. And so the first chapter is about this thing called white Christian nationalism, which I do think is a false gospel. So I think there's then I talk about 6 iconic biblical texts. So I want to go to the text and see, I would say there's a movement afoot, Jonathan, of diverse Christians who want to really contrast this false white gospel with the teachings of Jesus, because much of what we're hearing is, I think, really antithetical to the way of Jesus. And so it's trying to look at those texts and bring them back and refresh and reframe those texts. Because I think the answer isn't go left, go right, but go deeper. And how do we go deeper with the text? So to me, this is this false religion of white Christian nationalism. It's false. And just to spell it out, the name spells the problem. First of all, the most inclusive, welcoming vision in history and on the planet is the gospel of Jesus. And yet this makes it white. That's a problem. It says Christian, but it's not sacrifice or service. It's control, domination. And for those historians in your audience, they'll remember we have this thing called dominionist theology. It goes way back in our history before our founding. The nation was for white Europeans to come and to take. And that was justified theologically by papal bulls and Puritan teaching. And then finally, nationalist. Now, I'm a patriotic American. I love a lot of things about this kind of country. But to put a nation first is really, biblically, it's idolatry. It's an idolatry. You can't put a nation first. Jesus said, go into all the world, to his followers, he said, making disciples in every nation, teaching them to observe whatever I have commanded you. So I try and take that and I try to go through some of these biblical texts about what he commanded us and to see if we're in fact being faithful to what Jesus taught and told us.
Well, that's great. Thank you for that overview. How do you think Donald Trump and the Republican Party factor into this false white gospel that your book is about?
Well, I think this white Christian nationalism that's growing in this country is in support of Donald Trump. And so I think it's good to take our biblical texts and to bring Jesus into the conversation, basically. So that's what I try and do. For example, uh, uh, Springfield, Ohio is kind of a case study in what's happening right now. About two texts in my book. One, Jesus says, "You'll know the truth, and the truth will make you free." Uh, as I dig into that text, it's clear to me that the opposite of truth isn't just lies, it's captivity. People get captive to lies. And when J.D. Vance and then Donald Trump said that Haitian immigrants in Springfield were stealing and eating people's beloved dogs and cats, the Republican governor of Ohio said that's not true. Republican mayor said that's not true in Springfield. Haitian immigrants are contributing greatly to the city and its growth economically. But the lies have continued on and on and on. Often a news story goes away in 3 or 4 days. This one they keep pushing, and they keep lying about, and you look at who they lie about the most. They're lying about immigrants of color. That's who they lie about again and again. So these are lies, and they're indeed racial lies. And lies lead to violence. So now we have bomb threats in Springfield, schools closing, hospitals closing, death threats against individuals who say this isn't true, and yet they keep lying. And so it's playing to people's insecurities and their fears. And so to me, leadership is the question here. And we need to learn how to become a nation that is more and more multiracial, uh, multi-ethnic, multi-religious, and instead of bringing us together to solve those issues, this is a campaign that is trying to tear us apart, turn us into them. And for me, my conversion text that brought me to Christ was Matthew 25, the "it was me" text. I was hungry, I was thirsty, I was naked, I was sick, in prison, I was a stranger, it says. And the word stranger there literally means immigrant, refugee. That's what it means. And so instead of welcoming the stranger, like Jesus told us to, we're to fear the stranger and hate the stranger. Now, immigration is complicated. We're trying to figure out the right policy to fix a broken system. I've been doing that for years with both sides of the aisle. Both parties are at blame for this. So how do we fix and have a legal, humane, compassionate legal system? But you can't demean and demonize immigrants the way Donald Trump is, I don't think. And you can't, he's now threatening to deport millions and millions of people. And the Haitian immigrants are legal. The governor told us that. And so he wants to deport them too. So this to me is really contrary to the teaching of Jesus and the teaching that brought me to Christ, and how we welcome the stranger, says Jesus, is how we welcome him himself. As you've done to the least of these, he says, you've done to me. The most marginal, the vulnerable, the poor, how we treat them, the text says, is how we treat Christ himself.
So kind of coming off of that, I'm thinking about when I was a kid and who Donald Trump was when I was growing up in the late 90s, early 2000s. He was a very different figure, and he seemed like a pretty unlikely figure for evangelicals and Christians to rally around, the white evangelical to rally around. Now, why do you think that is? Do you think that evangelicals just saw him as a sort of useful tool? Like, you hold your nose and get him so that you could get the Supreme Court candidate because that was a big deal with Scalia being dead the first time? Or do you think there's actually some deeper historical and maybe even an ideological connection between Trump and Trumpism and American Christianity?
Well, that's the right question. I grew up in that white evangelical world myself, and there was this whole notion. It goes way back to our beginnings. The doctrine of discovery was called. The white Europeans had a right to this land, and even to displace and almost destroy an indigenous population, and then to enslave a whole African population, justified theologically. This goes way back. Donald Trump didn't invent this. He's using it. He's trying to manipulate it. But it's what I call, it's America's original sin. And repentance, the word biblically doesn't mean just feeling sorry or guilty. The word means like metanoia, as Jesus used. It means turn around, go in a whole different direction. So to me, the issue isn't Donald Trump is exploiting our worst history. And every nation has better angels and worse demons. And I think our demons of race go very deep in our history. And the church should be a place where those things are being overcome, are being transformed. But instead, he is polarizing and using race for his own political gain. So to me, this is a real problem theologically, to worship a nation, to put America first. That's an idolatry. We're not, as Christians, supposed to put a nation first. Even Americans, we don't do that. We're Christians first. And I want in the phrase white Christian, white evangelical, I want the word Christian to dominate that phrase, not white. And I think Donald Trump's appealing to our worst in that regard.
Well, the economy is a key issue for many voters in this election, with many feeling Trump has the advantage in this regard. Does Christianity have anything to say about economics? And how should that impact voters come November?
Well, the text I just raised is my best answer to your question. The prophets in the Bible, when they speak to princes, rulers, leaders, Israel and other rulers, they say that they'll be judged by how the poor and vulnerable are doing under their reign, not for their gross national product, their military firepower, or their culture being the enemy of the world. No, it's how we treat the most vulnerable. So to your question, the economics of Jesus are in the 25th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew. And the economics of Jesus turn our politics upside down. But I have to fight with both parties who tend to, the Democrats want to win the middle class, Republicans want to lean to the upper class, but the poor and vulnerable are often left out. And so I would say to all of us Christians who are voting, the first question shouldn't be just, how am I doing? How am I faring? What's best for me? There's the economic situation is very complicated. It's not true. Donald Trump says how good he was for people's economics. That really isn't true. And the economy is doing better, but it's still tough, and housing and prices. But that shouldn't be our primary question as Christian people. It should be, what's going to happen to those who are marginal, on the edges, outsiders, the least of these. So you'll never hear this from any party, but Christians should vote on behalf of the least of these, whom Jesus calls the hungry, the thirsty, the naked, the sick, the stranger, the immigrant, the imprisoned. The least of these, as a Christian, should be my primary concern, not just my own economic self-interest.
So kind of on that, many Christians would say, I do vote for the least of these. It's the unborn child. They're the ones without constitutional rights. So a lot of Christians will, or American evangelicals will sort of hold their nose and say, I have to vote for Donald Trump because Democrats are too pro-choice. So Donald Trump is the only option, right? That seems to be the logic working in a lot of evangelicals' minds. What would you say to that?
Well, first of all, I don't think we can be single issue voters. what happens to the poor, what happens to democracy. These are important things. But I do think we need a different conversation in America about abortion. I often am critical of both the left and the right. I don't want to punish women, uh, penalize women for often tragic and difficult, dangerous choices. Uh, and I think we all should come together around practically reducing the number of abortions in America. I think that's important. I want the left and the right to come together and try. And there's different views of all that in this country. In a democracy, you end up with some kind of middle ground or compromise. But how do you support women in terms of education, uh, nutrition, healthcare? Sometimes Republicans are pro-birth, but they're not pro-life. They're not supporting things for children after birth. The child tax credit after COVID in the Recovery Act cut child poverty by half. Now, Christians, and we all do, National Association of Evangelicals, the Catholic bishops, National Council of Churches, we all support the child tax credit, which is supporting families in overcoming poverty. That's pro-life. And yet the Republicans aren't supporting any of those policies that benefit low-income and low-income women and moms. Those policies are not supported by the Republican Party. So let's talk about a consistent life ethic that touches every area of supporting life, the values of life, particularly for low-income people. So we need a better and different conversation about abortion in this country. And most Americans, I don't think, want to punish women for difficult and tragic choices. And they want to support women, nutrition, healthcare, and all the rest. But finally, pro-life means all of life, not just a single issue. And pro-birth isn't pro-life, and that's what Republicans have to realize.
Would you call yourself pro-life in that maybe more broad sense?
In that consistent sense, yeah, I think reducing abortion is critical. And so people disagree on, even religions disagree on life issues, when life begins and all the rest. So a democracy will reflect those differences, but we could come together, Republican and Democrat, to try to reduce abortion by supporting women in all the ways I talked about. And that's would be a practical way to choose life.
Well, building on this idea of broadening out what it means to be pro-life, let's talk a bit about the environment. Trump pulled America out of the Paris Climate Accord and has referred to climate change as a hoax. However, his white evangelical base has kind of been, mostly unconcerned about this because I believe they're statistically the least likely demographic to care about the environment. What aren't they seeing? Would you say?
Yeah. Well, there's a generational gap here. I was on a phone call the other day with a number of young white evangelicals. And for them, the key issue is climate. As young white evangelicals, stewardship of all of God's creation. This is crucial. It's biblical. It's foundational. And how do we? It's personal for me. I've got a sister and her husband who live in Fort Myers, and they've just been through Helene. Now another one's coming, and flooding is happening every place. And that's due in part to climate change. And so I think defending God's creation, dealing with the reality of climate change is a Christian issue. And a whole lot of young Christians, this is their primary issue. So to me, let's broaden, as you say, broaden our view and talk about pro-life being concern for the whole creation and all of God's creatures. It's a much broader question, and the Trump people have shown no interest at all in climate change and clean energy, in moving toward a different kind of future. And I think a lot of Christians really want to do that.
Just as a follow-up then, are there certain climate policies that you think are more promising than others? So should Christians be considering alternative fuels? And if so, like which ones? What are some Christian activities that we can do as a response to our faith to help the environment?
Yeah, well, to call something a hoax is just to be uh, not telling the truth. I mean, climate change is being caused by fossil fuels, and so the transformation to solar and wind and cleaner energy is simply the practical, rational, scientific response to climate change. And to say that's not is to be just foolish and to ignore the facts. But I think there's a deeper issue theologically, which is how do we defend God's creation? And there's a whole movement now of Christians who are in favor of climate justice, because it's often the case that the people around the world who are impacted most by climate change are the ones who have contributed least to it. Poor and vulnerable people around the world are most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, and yet they're not the ones that have contributed most to the problem. So to me, it's scientific, it's practical, rational, but it's also Christian, as you said, in support of policies that really would transform our energy grid. Our energy grid has to change for the sake of God's creation, preserving God's creation. And to me, the fact that a lot of younger Christians, especially, get that, see that. My students at Georgetown, for them, they see this is about their lives and their kids' futures and their grandkids' futures. So to me, the Christians should get on board and provide a kind of spiritual, theological foundation for changing our energy grid to be more protective of God's creation. Makes a world of sense, not just scientifically, but theologically.
Are there certain climate activities? Are there certain policies or things related to the environment that you advise your students to do?
Oh, yeah,
Very practically.
decreasing our dependence on fossil fuels. Certainly, all the recycling that we're all learning how to do makes a world of sense. But you've got to change the energy grid. So it turns out that solar energy is proving more and more effective and even less costly. Wind, I've been to places where there are all these windmills, and they're making a difference. So we can recycle, we can be more clear on how we're living with all the plastic in our lives, all the rest. But more than just the personal choices to be energy, to be good stewards. That's the word, stewards. And I think the energy grid has to be fundamentally changed if we're going to prevent the kind of climate change that we're seeing impacting us everywhere in such a frightening way.
Okay. Well, I mean, with the environment, we're talking about a much broader global issue. So continuing on that broader frame, when it comes to, say, foreign policy, or even just law and order back home, many Christians believe we need sort of a strong, assertive Reagan-era male such as Trump to kind of hold a big stick and keep everyone in line. How well do you think that accords with Christian values, leadership, masculinity, all of that?
Do we need a strong man?
Do we need a stick being held? Yes.
Jesus said, "Blessed are the peace lovers," right? Oh, no, that wasn't it. Maybe he said, "Blessed are the peacekeepers, keep the lid on." No, that wasn't it. He said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God." The children of God. So peacemaking is conflict resolution. and the kind of Christian nationalism and Donald Trump's policies are conflict making. And so, how do we find a way to resolve our conflicts, which are inevitable among human beings, without killing each other? And so, that kind of uh, uh, foreign policy is based on how to resolve conflicts in the ways that will, in fact, again, preserve life. So, those are, in law and order, my goodness, let's be clear now. Let's be clear that I was a Little League baseball coach for 22 seasons. And when my kids got to be 10, 11, 12, we had these conversations about how, and I got permission from the black players and their parents, how every black kid in America has the talk with their dad or mom about how to behave in the presence of a police officer. Eye contact, where your hand should be, not reaching for things because you're in danger. And so I had some of my black players tell my white players on the same team in the dugout about the talk they had with their mom or dad. Now, none of the white players had heard about the talk, and even a lot of the parents of those kids didn't know about the talk. Every black kid has the talk. Every black church can tell you about the talk they have to have with their kids. And so raising children in America, it's a different world for black parents and black Christians than white parents and white Christians. So how do we engage with our black brothers and sisters in Christ who worry about the treatment of their youth groups and their kids on the streets? There is a clear difference. I teach a class on policing here, and I have my students go through their personal stories about policing. And it's so it's so clear every single time. Black and brown students have a different experience of policing than white students do. That's a fact. We can ignore it, but again, listen to black churches here. Talk to black pastors and how they see these questions. Law and order, absolutely, but law that treats all of us respectfully and equally is something that I just don't hear coming from the Trump campaign. And so, how do we respect each other and protect each other's kids? There's a real difference in policing racially. And we have to address that. Particularly white Christians have to address that if they want to be in relationship to their black brothers and sisters in Christ.
Now, just to kind of expand on that, what you're saying then is how this law and order is being applied is not being applied equally. But if I can expand this out, there is this sense that Trump is trying to just be a strong man in total, like in foreign policy. You know, I will represent American rights, you know, on the world stage. I will not capitulate to other nations and that sort of stuff. And that's the sort of image that he's wanting to portray to his voting population. Do you consider that as also something that's contrary to what Christ was saying when he said, "Blessed are the peacemakers," and just the message of Christ in total?
Absolutely. The strong man, demagogue. So Pilate is having a debate with Jesus on the day of Christ's crucifixion about the truth. And Pilate's losing the debate. That's when he says, "Oh, what is truth anyway?" And he washes his hands and he kills Jesus. Well, strongmen always want to undermine the idea of the truth, the idea of the truth itself. You can't find it. There's no truth to be found. And they want you then to believe them, just to believe them. And we've seen that strongmen all over the world. You know, it's hard to reconcile wanting a strong man to run your country with the teachings of Jesus. I mean, these are very different things. And Christians are supposed to be those who follow Jesus. So another text I'll bring here. There was a lawyer came to Jesus and said, "So how do I inherit eternal life?" Jesus says, "Well, I think you know. You love the Lord your God, all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and then you love your neighbor as yourself. Love your neighbor as yourself." And this lawyer then says, "Okay, who is my neighbor?" That question, who is my neighbor, may be the most important question for a democracy and for a nation moving toward a multiracial democracy. And Jesus uses the example of a Samaritan. Now, let's be clear. In the Judeo, the, 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 the society, the Judaism of his day, there were no good Samaritans. They were mixed race. They were half-breeds. They were dangerous. Uh, and Jesus lifts up one who's being othered. We often other people. The Samaritan was being othered by his society. And yet the man alongside of the road who'd been beaten and robbed and left for half dead was Jewish. Jewish scholars tell us that. So here's one who's being othered, stopping to help one who's other than him. This is an example of a neighbor. So maybe that means your neighbor in this parable maybe doesn't live, maybe lives outside your neighborhood. How do we love neighbors who are different than us? And I see Trump turning neighbors into enemies. And in a democracy, disagreeing is great. We need that different opinions. We need parties that have different views for a rigorous debate and dialogue. That's good. But to make neighbors into enemies, which this campaign, the Trump campaign, is doing, many Republicans that I know don't think that's right. And they're opposing him because he's turning, John McCain, when he ran against Barack Obama, defended Obama when he was attacked by people who attacked him maliciously and untruthfully. You can't see Donald Trump doing that. So turning neighbors into enemies is a danger to democracy. That's what strong men do. So strong men don't teach us to love our neighbor as ourselves. Jesus tells us the test of our love for God is to love our neighbor as ourselves. So I want to bring that principle into our politics. What does it mean to love our neighbor as ourselves and not listen to the caricature and stereotyping and demonizing of people who are different than we are? We have to find, and that's what the church is supposed to do, bring together people who are different than all the same and help them find a way to live together as part of the body of Christ. In fact, the Galatians text that I also do in the book is so crucial here. There is no longer Jew or Gentile, bond or free, male or female, says Paul, but all are one in Christ. Well, those are the three divisions, race, class, and gender, that divide us. And what I learned in studying that text anew was this was a baptismal rite in the early church. They read this text, Galatians 3:28, at all the baptisms. Baptism was taking our faith public, and they read that text as if to say, so these divisions that divide us and create violence, our Lord and Savior tells us to overcome these boundaries, transform these divisions, help us to come together. And if you don't want to be a part of that kind of group, you better go somewhere else, because that's not who we are. And I learned the Galatians 3:28 text. There's Fisk University has all these slaveholder Bibles that they pull together. That text is removed, Galatians, from all the slaveholder Bibles. It's gone, because that text is, in fact, bringing people together. And I think a lot of Christians down deep want to find a way to come together in Christ. And I think this is where we have to go, not just for the election, but afterwards, because strong men divide societies for their own power. And followers of Jesus bring people together. for the sake of Christ.
Thanks for that. I could see some people in our audience thinking, you keep bringing up race. And I don't actually think that the Republicans and are the ones who are making race an issue. They might say that it's actually the Democrats who are trying to weaponize race by making it a bigger issue, and they would say critical race theory and these types of things are inventions that Democrats are doing to problematize being white. And so I could see someone from that side of things, this isn't me speaking, but I can see someone from that side of things saying, yes, I wish we could get over racism, but the Democrats keep making it an issue and keep bringing it up instead of allowing things to heal and move on. What might you say to someone who comes from that kind of angle to this?
Well, I think if you listen to what Donald Trump is saying, the people he lies most about are immigrants of color. He says he wants immigrants from Norway, but not from Haiti or from South America, or Africa, or Asia. So that's where race keeps coming up again and again and again. Coming together, overcoming those boundaries is what Christians need to stand for and press Democrats and Republicans. Racism is this nation's original sin. And repentance from sin doesn't mean just feeling guilty or sorry. It means turning around and going in a whole different direction. So I want to believe that there are a lot of Christians out there who understand that and don't want to respond to the mobilization of fear and then hate and violence. And that's what we just cannot do. To talk about race truthfully, Jesus said, you'll know the truth will make you free. Let's talk about what it still means. And talk to your Black brothers and sisters in Christ, what it means for their lives and for their kids still in this country. And repentance of sin means to turn around. So I think talking about race truthfully is really important, but not just to sit there and blame people and point fingers and feel guilty and attack people. No, it's about how do we bring people together. And we've got a long way to go in this country still. And that's talk to any Black church people and they'll tell you that. So I want white church people to talk to their Black brothers and sisters about the realities of race still going on in this country. And the Black church is clear on that. And we need to be listening and paying attention to what they're saying.
We've brought up democracy a few times. You've talked about a multiracial democracy. And the subtitle of your book, I have to point out, it's Refounding Democracy. Do you actually see democracy, in some sense, as actually being on the ballot this coming month of November? And could this be the last democratic election?
Well, I think democracy is on the ballot. I think white Christian nationalism is also on the ballot. This election is indeed a test of democracy, because Donald Trump has said again and again that he won't even abide by this election if he doesn't win. That's unheard of in American society. January 6th was a mob attacking our Capitol with violence that he called together and incited, and against the peaceful transformation of power. Let me say it again, peaceful transformation of power. Our nation is based on that. Now we have, for the first time, candidates for president and vice president who won't agree to that, won't agree to a peaceful transformation of power. And they could take their case, and they did last time, to courts. All the courts said, no, this election was free and fair. All the courts, even Trump judges that he had appointed. So in the face of all that evidence, they want to say the big lie over and over again. And that's why people went to Washington on January 6th, because they believe the big lie. So democracy, when a candidate says he wants to terminate the Constitution, he'll be dictator on day one, All these things are frightening things. And Christians, we just did a statement by 200 Christian leaders signed the statement, including the National Association of Evangelicals, National Council of Churches, Black churches, Hispanic, Asian churches, white denominations, saying that, in fact, there's a threat to democracy going on. This isn't just another election. This isn't just Republican, Democrat. You got Liz Cheney came out last week, very conservative Republican, and she's opposing Trump because of the question he raised, his threat to democracy. That's why she's still very conservative, all kinds of policy issues. But she's supporting Kamala Harris because of democracy. So many people, I was in Atlanta recently and moderated a panel, 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, former elected officials, Saxby Chambliss from Georgia's senator was there. These people are afraid for our democracy. And they haven't changed their conservative views on policy issues. They're Liz Cheney, Saxby Chambliss, many people, Republicans that I know, that I'm close to, are afraid for democracy itself. So yes, democracy's on the ballot, and I think faith, the integrity of faith, is on the ballot too. Do we support this mobilization of racism? Do we support this strong man who wants us to believe him and not tell the truth? These are not political issues now; they're theological issues. So, and I think Christians who have different policy views, legitimately, justifiably, that's good for them. But a lot of Republicans that I see and know are turning against Trump because they're afraid that he will end democracy as we know it.
Well, so far we've talked a lot about how Christianity plays into particular political issues, but I wonder if you could comment a bit on, how Trump sees Christianity and the church itself. How does he approach and enlist faith?
Well, he's mobilizing some faith institution. He's using, and I think abusing faith. I don't see him being a practicing believer, a Christian man, in his history, his life, his behavior, his morality, his values, how he's acted in the world. But he certainly has pulled together a group of chaplains from the far right, and he's using religion. And now politicians on all sides can try and do that. We are not supposed to be chaplains for the left or the right. I say don't go left, don't go right, go deeper. Dr. King said it well. The church is not meant to be the master of the state, nor in charge, controlling from the top down, which many of Trump's supporters, that's what they want. They want Christians to take over, and that's not the way of Christ. And nor are we the servants of the state, meaning we just take care of the victims, pick up all the pieces, pull bodies out of the river. We're good at that, but not sending anybody upstream to see what or who's throwing them in. King said we're to be not the master, which is what Christian nationalism says they want, or the servant, but the conscience of the state. What does it mean to be people who are going to raise critical issues, moral issues, and faith issues, particularly on behalf of those who are left out on the outside? So I want faith to come back in this kind of conversation, not to choose an ideology, but you've got Republicans and Democrats now fighting for democracy by opposing Trump. And after this election's over, you've got a lot of reconciliation that has to be done, both in society, but even in the churches. So I'm saying, let's go back to text. What did Jesus say? What did he mean? What did he do? And finally, Christians can't pursue political power and ignore the teachings of Jesus. We just can't do it.
Well, one of the reasons people use for voting for Trump is kind of what Franklin Graham said. You have to hold your nose and vote for Trump because, God can still use leaders that are nevertheless corrupt. And sometimes David or Solomon or even Nebuchadnezzar is thrown out as an example. What is your response to this idea that God is still going to use Donald Trump for the good, even though he's in some sense morally corrupt?
Well, the good is something that we just don't see. You can excuse his morality. It's very interesting. These are people who were critical of the morality of Bill Clinton, and the liberal left side wasn't. I was at the time. That morality is an issue for leadership. To say it's not is, I think, a serious mistake. Morality is important for our leaders. I said that about Bill Clinton, critical of him for that, and I say it now about Donald Trump. But the good is something we just don't see. It's a lot of division he's causing. He's causing a spiraling. There are more people in America now than ever before, a lot more, who think violence might be necessary to establish their political goals. And that's just antithetical to the teachings of Christ. So that's not good. That's bad. And that's something that we can't, we can't see fears manipulated, hate being stoked, and violence being justified. I heard Trump over the weekend saying, raise your hand at one of his rallies up here for Kamala Harris. And they all laughed. And he said, oh, don't raise your hand. Anybody raise their hand is likely to get hurt in this crowd. What does that mean? You're saying the justifying of violence is something we cannot support as Christians in politics. And that's what's happening now. So again, let's evaluate what we see in here by the teachings of Christ, not by gaining power for the agendas that we think we support. So I think it's got to come back to what Jesus said and did. So this book is all about these 6 iconic biblical passages. And for example, we're training poll chaplains, people to be in polling places where voter suppression has happened before, or voter intimidation. Clergy alongside the lawyers, not for partisan, but to calm things down, to make religious authority present in places where violence or polarization is most threatened. And we train poll chaplains, and we did just the other night again. We trained 1,500 so far. I've always given the job of doing the moral framing. I said, well, imagine all the political noise all around us. When I feel that noise, I go to the first chapter, first book of the Bible, Genesis 1:26, and it says, with all the noise going on, then God said, I love that. Be quiet, noise. Then God said, what does God say? Let us create humankind after our own image, in our own image, after our likeness. That's the divine foundation for any earthly talk about human rights, civil rights, voting rights. So any attempt to suppress a vote or deny a vote or intimidate a vote or not count a vote because of the color of one's skin or any other reason is an assault on Imago Dei, on the image of God. So I want the image of God to be foundational in how we treat this election. Are we treating people, even people different than us, who are all made in the image of God? Are we respecting the image of God? Are we the Imago Dei movement, or are we not? That's, to me, the foundational question for this election. Treating people as if they're made in the image of God and loving our neighbors as ourselves. Those are criteria we have to apply to this election.
Thank you so much for everything you've provided for us today. If someone was really curious about you, your work, or just this topic in general, what resources would you recommend for them?
Other than, of course, the book itself, the False White Gospel.
Well, I was giving him a chance to pitch it. Come on.
I tried, as I say in this new book, The False White Gospel, to take these texts. So a lot of pastors are preaching on these texts, and that's a good thing to do as pastors during a time like this. Preach on the text. What did Jesus say? Our Center on Faith and Justice here at Georgetown is easy to find. Center on Faith and Justice at Georgetown, or Jim Wallis, and we try and provide a space, a safe space to talk about faith and public life. My class this fall is Faith, Race, and Politics, and very diverse students in the class, and we're talking all of this through. So I think, our center here at Georgetown, our Faith and Justice Center on Faith and Justice at Georgetown is the easiest way to find our resources. But I would go to other places too, where I think Christians, our faith should shape our politics, not the other way around. Our faith should shape our politics, not the other way around. And so I do a podcast called The Soul of the Nation, and it's conversations with very interesting people. Like the last one was with Elizabeth Newman, who just wrote a book you all should pitch called The Kingdom of Rage. She's a counterterrorism expert from Bush and Trump administrations, expert on extremism. She's worried about the violence. And the extremism comes from, she says, her background, like mine, white cultural evangelicalism. That's where a lot of extremism is growing. So we talk to people like her. And then I do a Substack column called God's Politics. And we try and deal with what's happening in the world of religion and the world of culture and the world of politics, and try to bring together what faith should mean for all of that. So I just say ask the faith question first, not the political question first. The faith question first. What does your faith require you to do? And at this point, I really do think, as your questions raise, that democracy really is at stake. And faith is at stake, the integrity of faith. And I think the third test is a new generation who are watching the faith community and seeing what we stand up for and don't, how we speak the truth or not. And so with all the limitations of politics and all candidates, we have to be faithful to what Jesus taught us. And that's during, before, and after elections. Our responsibility is to say, what did Jesus teach? And let's have that conversation and apply it to our public life.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate your time, Jim, and for everything you've given us here.
Great to talk to your folks, and just let's all be in prayer about this election. It's really going to be critical for the nation's future. And in the Bible, there are two kinds of time: chronos time, tick-tock, and kairos time, a time that can change time for generations. I think in this election, we're in a kairos time. It's not just any election, it's a kairos moment for Christians. And we have to respond as disciples of Jesus.
So, that was fun. I wonder now, though, in order to continue the fun, Seth, if instead of actually defending our own personal opinions, we just took a side and we each argued for one side in this upcoming election, just for kicks and giggles. You don't need to take we don't need to actually take the stance you agree with, because I think we're both very nuanced unto death in our views on these things.
Plus, the more mysterious we are, the better.
So yeah, we don't want anyone to actually know what our cards are. So why don't, for the sake of it,
terrible opinions.
Why don't we just, for the sake of it, each take a side, Republican, Democrat, Trump against Trump, and then just argue it and play it out and see how it goes.
Okay, so which side am I then?
Well, you're obviously pro-Trump, Seth, because you're
pro-Trump.
You're
Okay.
from you. I'm Canadian. I can't pretend to be pro-Trump. It's weird. I don't
So
even
much
know.
for your opinion.
I'm not even pro-America. I'm just here. I'm just here. I don't have I don't have skin in this game. So
Okay. So what do we start us off, John? Start us off, Kamala.
well, I don't. Does she have an accent? She doesn't have an accent.
She does. Oh my gosh.
I thought that what he was saying about loving the other. I mean, how do you negate that? Trump just speaks so horribly about other people, and that's not just liberal propaganda. All you need to do is hear this man talk. Just listen to one of his speeches. He talks dismissively about pretty much everyone. Like, this is not a person who I would want to be around my kids, let alone running the country. When he talks, he just doesn't talk about other people as if they were made in the image of God.
Well, let's be honest. Both sides do that. The other side does that about Trump people. They dismiss them. Those stupid. They're a basket of deplorables. That was the thing that killed Hillary Clinton's campaign, is how negative she was about American people. So let's not pretend that the other side, that both sides aren't demonizing certain people groups. But with Trump, it's people that he very specifically always targets: criminals. And the people going across. It's about safety. It's about securing America. It's about America first. Take care of our own so that we can then take care of others. But we can't even take care of our own right now. And that's what people are worried about. So the question isn't, oh my gosh, look how Trump is demonizing other people. Well, what are you doing there? You're demonizing him. And so everyone is doing this. Just sometimes I think we like to pick on the people that that we consider an in-group, right? And some people are just ignorant of who their in-group is. Oh, it's okay to demonize those people because they deserve it. We all do that.
Of course we all do that. But the difference
They
is
deserve it.
you went back to Hillary Clinton. You had to go 8 years for your example. I'm not saying Democrats don't do this, haven't done this, aren't doing this. But there's
That's
a different
famous example.
There's a difference between, occasionally demonizing the other, which everyone does, and the constant sludge of demonization that comes from Trump. Every single one of his speeches, it's just nonstop egomaniacal ranting about everyone other than him. Even people who
When
used
was the
to
last full
even
speech that you listened
just
to?
let me finish. Even people who were Republican, who were in his cabinet, who were in his White House, have later come back around and change their mind, and Trump says, oh, they're idiots, they're morons, they don't know how to do their job. You hired these people, man, and as soon as anyone distances themselves from Trump, they're an idiot, they're a loser. And you brought up the example of immigrant crime. He's only focusing on criminals. They're bringing in the rapists, the murderers. Yeah. But he's promoting this narrative that immigrants bring more crime, which just statistically isn't true. Immigrants en masse tend to be equal, if not better behaved than everyone else, because they're trying to stay out of criminal, they're trying to just fit in the society. They already have enough troubles, especially those who are illegal. Because if illegal people do criminal actions and get pulled over by the cops, they get sent back home. Immigrants aren't trying to do crime, they're trying to avoid crime. And the statistics bear that out. There's no immigrant crime wave thing, and Trump has just been promoting this whole view that immigrants are increasing crime when they're just not. There's no statistics to back that up.
There's a lot of falsehood in what you just said. First off, you're saying, oh, they're not doing crimes. So here's the thing. Statistically, we can't know how much is done because those crimes have to be caught and prosecuted, which is hard to do when a person is undocumented. Right? So of course the statistics are going to be lower. The question we can look at is what percent of those people going over are in fact criminal. And the statistics are the rapists and the murderers are much higher than the population in general. And they're doing it to avoid criminal indictment. So let me ask you this, John. Do you think rapists should go to jail? The only way to do that is to.
I am willing to say that, but I don't know what that means for your point.
That should not be.
I don't. But that doesn't play into your point. You said it like an aha. No, I see no aha here. Go ahead.
Because in order to do that, they need to be deported, so they could be. The whole point of him saying they're bringing rapists and stuff is they need to be in jail back in their country of origin, not over here avoiding crime. Duh. And obviously, some of the people who do go over are these gangs. These gangs that we've never heard about until Trump made them a big deal.
Nobody thinks that immigrants who have been accused of rape shouldn't be deported. The point is he's trying to negate
in sanctuary cities. Yes, let me finish. The mayors of certain sanctuary cities have said they will not deport people even if there are criminal indictments. That's the point of having a sanctuary city. You're wrong. That has been part of the line because it's drawing a line in the sand. Either everyone's let in or no one's let in. So the Trump people go, no one's let in. The Democrats go, everyone is let in. So don't tell me that's not the case. And let me keep going. You say, I have to go back 8 years to talk about that. No. Right now, Republicans are being said that they are anti-democratic. All of the people, they hate democracy and that sort of stuff. That's going on. And you say, it's vitriol and Trump's thing. When was the last time you listened to a full Trump speech? Rather than a soundbite taken out of context. In all seriousness, when was the last time?
Like a month ago? I didn't want to listen to that 2-hour thing after his
you don't want to. Yeah.
No, I didn't want to listen to the 2-hour thing. The whole thing was
Name one thing.
He was talking about
You get on to me for filling something from 8 years.
No, I just told you that I did. No, I can tell you generic things that he said, that he says in everything. He talks about the immigrant crimes, and okay, you're doing that thing where you just, where you interrupt me, and then you make me stutter, and it sounds like I'm an idiot. But all you've done is you keep cutting me off. Let me address your points.
You're cutting me off.
No, let me address your points one by one. You were saying there are specific safety cities. I don't want to get into the nuances of that. Perhaps you have a nuanced point there. But it's not the point that is driving Trump's position or his base. His base isn't trying to make more nuanced immigration reform. They're trying to just keep immigrants out en masse. And so...
Illegal immigrants.
No, okay.
No, but Trump's policy that allowed for immigration was the second most lenient in the history of the United States. Make sure you get your facts straight.
Okay. But what I'm saying is what is motivating Trump's base is not for more nuanced policy around immigrants accused of crimes. It is to shut the borders down en masse because there is a belief that immigrants overall tend to bring more crime than non-immigrants. But that is statistically not the case. Immigrants do not provably, demonstrably bring more crime. You said it's because it's hard to ascertain details, statistics about this non-legal group. Perhaps that's the case, but then your whole case is built upon an absence of evidence. And do we really want the whole Republican position on this to be a hypothetical based on a lack of evidence?
I gave evidence. I talked about the people who are coming over and how whether or not they commit a crime here, which inevitably they will, and those are crimes that should not happen, those people need to be indicted because the murderers and rapists, as you said, ought to go to jail. They shouldn't be allowed to hide away.
Again, that's my point about more nuanced specifics of safety cities, not the en masse fear of immigrants that is actually pushing this issue forward.
So the fear and the policy are different issues. Fear is often used to drive policy, but everyone does that. Go to the vote to save democracy. This could be our last election. That is a fear-driven thing. So don't pretend like politicians haven't always used fear as a motivation. The question is whether or not the policy of reducing illegal immigration is not a net good for all people in the United States, legal immigrants included. Because what's really interesting is quite often Hispanics are often the most vocal about illegal immigration because they went through the whole process and now they can't find jobs because they have to get a certain legal pay whenever employers are much more willing to pay the illegal pay to illegal immigrants, pay them under minimum wage because they're not documented.
Yeah, it's interesting because everyone...
Poor, one last thing, sorry. If we care about the poor and the people who aren't white, think about that. There's a reason Hispanics are actually moving towards Trump rather than away from him. Wouldn't you think that if he was so racist and terrible, that minority groups would be moving away from him rather than toward him?
So everyone always says, we don't have a problem with immigrants. We're not racist for that reason. We have a problem with illegal immigrants. Do the legal process and so on. But I'm actually am an immigrant, and I can tell you that even as a Canadian immigrant, a country that doesn't really have this type of relationship that's so negative as Mexico has with America, even as a Canadian immigrant, the process was hell. It was systematically designed to make it impossible. I got married to your sister, and we should have been able to settle in America. Instead, we had to leave because there was no legal avenue for us to stay. So we had to move to Canada, weren't able to move back for almost 8 years. Every single time we've tried to get back into the country, it has been insanely impossible. They kept my passport for years. I wasn't able to go back and see my family for years. There was a 2.5-year period where I couldn't see my family, including my sister's kid who was born. I didn't get to go back and see her. It was a demonic, evil process. There, I'll demonize something that does not make legal immigration plausible for most people. And I'm a Canadian with a lot of power who was able to get a lawyer, and it was still absolutely horrific. So no, legal immigration is not plausible for a lot of people, especially when we're not just talking about immigrants, but refugees who are fleeing for their lives. The legal immigration system is broken, and I don't think Republicans have any desire to fix it because this is something they keep campaigning on.
A lot of misinformation, what you just said. First off,
I just talked about my own story.
Your own story, which is anecdotal. Now, if it was that hellish and that difficult, right, you would expect America to have, on average, lower immigration, correct? You don't. America lets in more immigrants than any other country. Quite often, it gets more immigrant applications than most other countries combined. So yeah, the process is difficult because it's next to impossible to weed out and say, who can we let in? Because we just can't let in. It doesn't make sense to be able to let in everyone. That would destroy the country quite quickly. You have to be selective in this process when there is such high demand to immigrate to the United States. So yes, the process is difficult, and I am sorry for that. But as a policy issue, it's not just something you can just snap and make better. That makes sense?
I think Seth has played his cards here and showed how subhuman and not made in the image of God he is, because he clearly doesn't care about his brother-in-law, his sister, he doesn't care about his own sister and her marriage to an immigrant. He doesn't care about his immigrant nephews who were born in England and had so much trouble coming to this country. You're less than human, Seth. You're a murderer. You're a rapist. You're the worst. Why don't we? I think we're going a bit in circles here. I think we both said some good stuff. I maybe said more good stuff than you, but that's okay. Let's do something more tame, less vitriolic. Say abortion.
Oh, okay, sounds good. Well, so, go ahead. You start.
Start. I started last time. You have to start.
Yeah. So Trump has softened his issue on abortion. Let's just be completely honest. He has. I mean, he doesn't want a national abortion ban. He got Roe v. Wade overturned. And yet, John, as he's typing away, and yet there still is a pro-life case to be made for Trump. There is not a pro-life case to be made for Kamala Harris. And yes, we should be pro-life for everyone, right? But pro-life begins with pro-birth. There is no life if you kill someone in the womb. So let's not pretend we're pro-life if we're killing people in mass. And if we're going to say we're going to be Imago Dei, and yet at the same time be okay with killing the least voiced, the least fortunate people in the world, the unborn child, the ones who literally cannot physically speak up for themselves, we cannot pretend to be pro-Imago Dei. Let's just get rid of that. We're not being pro-Imago Dei if we're not even allowed. And people are like, oh, we need to care for the poor and their life situation afterward. More people die in the U.S. from overeating than undereating. But a lot more people die from abortion. Millions a year. So let's get rid of this false thing that Republicans only care about birth and stuff. No, they deserve the name pro-life if anyone does.
So I love that you brought up Trump shifting his position on this, because Trump, a few decades ago, was pro-choice. He obviously shifted in order to
We don't allow repentance as Christians.
No, he obviously shifted, and knowing his moral lack of authority on multiple issues, he shifted to appeal to his Republican base, and now he's shifting again to soften his position on abortion in order to appeal to in-betweeners and Democrats. I don't think this man cares 1 inch about the unborn. I don't even think you would argue with me on that position. But even so, he already got the Supreme Court justices in. The decision's already made. I don't think Trump being in for another 4 years is going to make a single difference on this, because he's already got the Supreme Court justices in. So if you say you are a Christian who took an ends justifies the means case with abortion, I don't like Trump. He's disgusting, but the ends justifies the means to overturn Roe v. Wade and get the Supreme Court justices on there. The court is stacked. That's not changing anytime soon. So he's already overturned Roe v. Wade. That's not changing anytime soon. What is the point of bringing him on again, especially as he's softening his approach towards abortion right now? I think the pro-Trump case for abortion is weaker now than it's ever been. I thought it was weak as a single issue vote earlier, but I think it's basically dead for me now. And what's interesting is you bring up death of the unborn and the numbers that are going to die there. And I can see that being a single issue voter, and a single issue for a lot of people. But what about the environment? Trump pulled us out of the Paris Accords. Trump has called has called climate change a hoax. Long term, that is going to potentially lead to the death of billions of people and the extinction of the human race on the planet. If you want to be a single issue voter, the climate change crisis, which Trump has basically denied repeatedly, is the single issue to stake your whole thing on. Because there's not going to be any children 100 years from now unless we change what we're doing. If you want to do... yeah, go ahead.
The models you're using are so unscientific. You talk about people who deny climate change. People who say the human race is going extinct are also... That's a ridiculous claim.
I am basing my claim on the film Children of Men, which is clearly canon that we won't have babies anymore. That's the future, Seth.
Do you know what percent of Earth's history Earth has not had ice caps? 75%.
No.
75% of Earth's history, there have been no ice caps. Even the most exaggerated climate models of what we're doing to the environment doesn't say we'll never have ice caps. We are in a global cooling stage. So yes, it will cause a lot of damage. Let's just do worst case scenario. Yeah. And you bring up the Paris Climate Accords like there's some salvation. Do you know how much they cause the biggest CO2 producing countries to reduce their CO2 amount? Do you know how much, John?
Well, you've asked multiple questions. Which question do you want me to answer? Because I had a follow-up.
Do the climate accord, because I'm going to keep going.
Okay, I don't know the random off the statistics.
I do. It doesn't ask them to reduce. It lets them go higher. It's the Western nations that have to go lower in order to offset countries like China and India so that they can go higher. The Paris Climate Accords is not our salvation. And the more we pretend that it is, even if you're pro-environmental, it's dumb. And it's like your case against Trump and abortion. It's similar to my case against Trump against the Paris Climate Accords and the environmentalism. It's a failed thing. And as far as the environment, as far as Trump and the abortion go, that's not a good argument because yes, while Trump has softened it, Democrats have hardened. And now they are saying we want to make it national law that all states have to allow for abortion. The Supreme Court's not the only way. You're treating it as that's the only way to make abortion law. No, Congress is the normal way. Congress is the normal way, and that's what they're trying to do now. And that's what a vote for Kamala is. It's a vote for more children dying in the womb.
Okay. One, Trump is softening his position on this anyway, strategically, which shows you he never really had a position to
Politicians
begin with.
never do that. No, Kamala's been perfect on that.
75%. What percent of that 75 have humans been on the planet?
You know what has been on the planet? Biodiversity.
Okay, but you were saying that for 75% of the planet, we haven't had ice caps. Has that been a 75% where humans existed in a healthy, thriving way?
The question is would humans survive? And we would. There's extinction in this. Extinction is not a thing in this unless we do nuclear war on top of it.
Maybe the human race might survive, but Seth, you know more about this than I do because your background is in biology. On the current models, how many people are projected to die because of the climate crisis?
There's no consistent model. It depends
What's the range, Seth? What's the range?
There's no
I've heard you talk about this. It's billions. We're talking about billions. It is comparable. It is comparable to the unborn and the abortion question.
No, the most pessimistic thing is that. And here's the thing. Let's just say, okay, Trump should harden his thing on the environment. That doesn't mean we just ignore the abortion issue. Let's be okay with killing children today so that we can get good environmental policies for the future. Here's the thing. I don't think Democrats are going to save the environment. Do you? I feel like that's one of the most mind-boggling things. I think that what's going to save the environment is we're going to run out of oil soon. Most countries are past peak oil. So there's going to be an economic demand to find an alternative.
I don't think Kamala is going to magically save the environment by snapping her fingers. But I do think Democrats are putting in more long-term sustainable things to make this an issue. This is part of their platform. It's part of how, and Trump's calling it a hoax. So I think, I do think Democrats are going to make it better. They're not going to make it worse the way I'm pretty sure Trump is going to. And the key thing is, though, that we're in the time to act now. We don't have 50 years to start acting. This is the time to do it. This is the crucial window to do it.
What Trump called a hoax was the models that talked about these mass death and that's what he called a hoax. So let's be very careful. So, I mean, if we're going to call Trump a liar and get on to him for being a liar, why is it that Democrats are so okay taking his words out of context? You know what I'm saying? If you're going to get on to him for switching positions on abortion to suit Paul, why are we not upset that, Joe Biden has switched his opinion 50,000 times in his, very long political career? This is one of those picking and choosing things.
Yeah.
I think it's not okay when you do it.
I think every politician strategically pivots to meet their base where they're at. Obviously, but that doesn't.
That's how you phrase it when it's a Democrat.
No, but that doesn't mean, therefore, it doesn't matter what you shift your opinion on willy-nilly, because who cares? I think more egregious examples should still be called out. And I think we can all agree that Trump is a pretty egregious example. This man has radically shifted his position over the last few decades. He does not have a consistent position on this is not a guy who cares about what is right. This is a guy who says whatever he says to stay in power.
Thanks again for listening to the Spiritually Incorrect podcast. If you like what you heard, don't forget to like and subscribe below, or to check us out on Spotify. And if you want to hear more from this week's episode or guest, our Patreon account has exclusive unaired content, often featuring up to an hour of additional footage and interviews for each episode. We save some of the most controversial and pulse-pounding topics just for our Patreon members. Members get access to that, plus the chance to meet monthly with Jonathan and I, suggest episode topics, join us live for an episode to ask the special guests questions, or even get a personalized episode custom-made just for you. Check out our Patreon link in the description below. And don't forget to check out our official website at spirituallyincorrectpodcast.com to see what else you're missing out on. Sound effects from Zapsplat.com. Special thanks to Jordan Birch, whose song Starry Night provides the intro and outro for this podcast. You can hear more of his music on YouTube or Spotify.